In the heart of the great forest where the mahogany trees stretched their arms to the sky and the river sang over smooth stones, Ananse the spider stretched his own 18 legs and listened to the gossip of the weaver birds. They spoke of Osibo the leopard, whose spotted coat flashed like fallen sunlight between the trunks, whose pride was as loud as his roar, and whose appetite for respect was even larger than his appetite for meat. The animals whispered that Osibo had declared himself the guardian of the forest paths, demanding tribute from every creature who wished to pass, a feather from the guinea fowl, a yam from the farmer's field, a song from the cicadas at dusk. Ananse, who was smaller than a yam and lighter than a feather, felt the old itch in his belly, the itch that came whenever someone claimed to be bigger than a story. He remembered his grandmother saying that a name is a net, and that the strongest net is woven from other people's certainty. He decided, not out of hunger but out of the restless cleverness that made his joints click, that he would tangle Osibo's certainty until the leopard begged to be untangled. He sat on a silk thread above the path, watched the leopard prowl with his tail flicking like a metronome, and began to plan a trick that would not shed blood but would spill pride. Ananse knew that no trick works unless the mark believes he is the one setting the terms. So he went first to the old tortoise, who kept the forest calendar in the rings of his shell. He asked, in a voice as soft as dust, when the moon would be full and silver enough to make shadows sharp. The tortoise, who had seen many of Ananse's schemes bloom and collapse, sighed and said the moon would be round in 3 nights, when the nightjar would sing twice. Ananse thanked him and left a tiny gift of dew on a leaf, because even tricksters must pay their debts. Then he visited the palm wine tapper, a man with hand-stained amber, and borrowed a gourd, promising to return it filled with a story. The man laughed and said stories do not fill gourds, but Ananse replied that they fill the heads of those who drink them. With the gourd tucked under his abdomen, Ananse spun a line down to the forest floor and began to gather the things he would need: a handful of red camwood powder, 3 smooth river stones, a strip of bark from the silk cotton tree, and the discarded moth of a python, which shimmered like oil. He walked through the afternoon, humming a tune his mother used to sing while she mended webs, and by the time the fireflies began to blink. His plan had the shape of a net, with Osibo's pride at the center. On the first night of his scheme, Ananse appeared at the clearing where Osibo liked to sun his spots and announced, in a voice that carried like a drumbeat, that he had been appointed by Niam the sky god to conduct a census of all the brave hearts in the forest. The leopard, who loved titles even more than he loved fresh antelope, lifted his chin and asked what a spider knew of bravery. Ananse bowed low, his legs trembling just enough to look sincere, and said that Niam cared less for size than for the weight of one's name, and that he, Ananse, had been given a measuring cord made of moonlight. He produced a strip of silk cotton bark, which he had dusted with camwood so that it glowed faintly red in the dusk, and told Osibo that any creature who wished to be recorded in the sky god's book must first allow the cord to be tied around their waist, so that their courage could be weighed. Osibo, suspicious but unwilling to be left out of a list that might be read in the heavens, demanded proof that the cord was genuine. Ananse, anticipating this, tossed one of the river stones into the air and caught it on the back, where it stuck with a soft thud. He declared that the stone was the heart of a coward, heavy with fear, and that the bark rejected it. The leopard sniffed the bark, smelled only tree and earth, and, deciding that there was no danger in a piece of bark, allowed Ananse to loop it around his middle. The cord, of course, was not a measuring tool but a snare. As soon as it settled around Osibo's sleek belly, Ananse tugged the hidden filament that ran from the bark to a branch overhead. The branch, which he had bent and tied down earlier with vine, sprang up, hoisting the leopard's hindquarters off the ground just enough that his front paw scrabbled in the leaf litter. Osibo roared, a sound that sent monkeys chattering, but Ananse, perched safely on a higher twig, shouted that the sky god was lifting the brave to test their balance. He urged the leopard to be still, to show composure, lest Niam think him unworthy. Osibo, who would rather die than look foolish before an audience of frogs and fireflies, froze with his whiskers trembling. Ananse used the moment to paint 3 spots on the leopard's forehead with camwood paste, muttering that these were the marks of the chosen. The leopard, unable to see his own forehead, believed he had been honored.
Easy now.
Ananse then lowered him gently, bowed, and said the first test was complete. Word of the leopard's elevation spread faster than a grass fire. By sunrise the guinea fowl were clucking that Osibo had been lifted by the sky god, and the duiker told the civet, who told the hornbill, until even the river seemed to murmur the news. Osibo, His pride now swollen to the size of a baobab fruit, strutted along the path and demanded double tribute, claiming he was now Niam's deputy. Ananse watched from his web, satisfied that the first knot had held, and prepared the second. He went to the clearing where the palm wine tapper left his gourd each evening and filled it with fermented palm sap, then added the python's mold, which unraveled in the liquid like a question. He carried the gourd to Osibo's favorite drinking pool and set it on a flat stone, announcing that Niam had sent a draft of the celestial register for the leopard to sign with his claw. Osibo, who could not read but would not admit it, dipped a claw into the sap, which was sticky and dark, and made a mark on the strip of bark Ananse produced. The sap, mixed with the oils from the python skin, dried quickly and glued the bark more firmly around his waist. Now came the part that required timing. Ananse had told the weaver birds to sing a particular song at dusk, a song about the leopard who could not be caught. When the birds began, their layered trills made it sound as if many creatures were calling Osibo's name from every direction. Osibo, whose ears were keen, turned his head this way and that, trying to locate the chorus, and in doing so he tangled the bark cord around a low stump. He growled and pulled, but the sap had hardened and the cord held fast. Ananse appeared, looking alarmed, and cried that the forest spirits were jealous and were trying to bind Niam's deputy. He offered to cut the cord but said he would need Osibo's promise to give up the tribute system, because the sky god favored generosity over taxation. Osibo, feeling the tug of the stump and the weight of his own reputation, hesitated. He did not want to look weak, but he also did not want to be stuck while the whole forest watched. Ananse, seeing the leopard's indecision flicker in his amber eyes, pressed his advantage with a story, as spiders always do. He told Osibo about the time the wind tried to own the trees and ended up scattering seeds instead, and about the river that tried to keep all its water and dried up in the dry season. He spoke slowly, letting each word settle like dust on the leopard's whiskers, until Osibo's breathing slowed and his tail stopped lashing. Then Ananse said he would fetch his sharpest mandibles to cut the cord. But only if Osibo agreed to a new rule. Anyone who wished to pass the part would tell a story instead of paying tribute, and the best story would be rewarded with a sip from the god. Osibo, whose pride was still tender from being lifted and bound, saw a way to keep his status without the burden of collecting yams. He agreed, and Ananse, with a great show of effort, gnawed through the bark just enough that the leopard could slip free, though the camwood marks remained on his forehead like a crown. The forest did not change overnight, but the path changed its sound. Instead of the clink of guinea fowl feathers and the thud of yams, there was laughter, and the clearing filled at dusk with creatures taking turns. The tortoise told a slow story about the first rain, the hornbill recited a rapid tale of how he got his cask, and even the shy pangolin whispered a memory of rolling into a ball. Osibo, who had never listened before, found himself leaning forward, his ears swiveling to catch the endings. He discovered that being the keeper of stories was a heavier, stranger honor than being the keeper of tribute, because stories grew and changed and sometimes made him laugh at himself. Ananse sat above them on his thread, sipping the last of the palm sap, and watched the leopard spots catch the firelight. When the moon was full, he swung down and whispered to Osibo that Niam's book was complete. Osibo, his belly full of other creatures' words rather than their goods, nodded and said he would guard the path as long as the stories kept coming. Ananse climbed back to his web, knowing that the trick had worked not because the leopard was foolish, but because everyone, even a leopard, wants to be part of a tale that is larger than himself.